Welcome back to another episode of Expats in Ukraine with your host, me, Corey. Today, my guest, he is a British journalist and documentary filmmaker who relocated to Ukraine. Had to read that last part. But anyways, his name is Caolan Robertson. What's up, Caolan? How are you, bud?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, man. Thanks for coming to my party, by the way.
Thanks for having me on and for inviting me to Kyiv.
Yeah, I know. Ever since I invited you to Kyiv for my party, it seems like you want to move here now. Not seems like, you're moving here now.
Since you invited me, I have decided to move to this city because I realized I was a little lonely in Odessa. I mean, I was there because I wanted to report from Kherson and be quite close to there. But you reminded me of the volume of life that exists in this city. So I've just booked a place now until February next year.
You booked it until February. Wow.
Until February.
Wow, I inspire people. You see that? Come to Kyiv, you'll never want to leave.
Exactly.
So I don't know if you've seen my podcast before, but what I like to do is like an icebreaker at the beginning. So it's basically a this or that. I'll give you two options. You pick which one you would prefer, I guess. So it gets people better understanding who the real Caolan is. I don't know if this is all a mask. I know you're wearing makeup, but but yeah, I'm also wearing makeup. I think I look prettier though. I guess
you look
like
good.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. Okay, so we'll start with the first one. I don't know what this first item is. Dublin coddle or borscht?
Borscht, definitely.
What is Dublin coddle?
I actually don't even really know. It's slightly mythical in Ireland.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because I Googled it and it's like this. It's similar to like solyanka, if you're familiar with the soup here. It's like a meat soup, leftover meat soup. And I just Googled it's like, yeah, looking at stuff from Ireland because I don't really know.
Well, a lot of food in Ireland is kind of like peasant food because we had the potato famine back in the old days, which is the only education I was really taught about when I was in Ireland. Every country has a completely different type of education that they're taught.
Yeah, so you know your way around a potato then, right?
Yeah. The Irish can do things with a potato you couldn't possibly imagine.
Sounds hot, man. I'm starting to sweat a little bit, Caolan. Let's take this interview slowly.
Yeah, so that was basically my education. And that's based around the kind of dish you're describing. But borscht is more exciting, I think.
Well, of course, man. It's very Ukrainian too. Slava Ukraini.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, next one. Irish whiskey or Ukrainian horilka?
Irish whiskey, 100%.
Irish whiskey? Okay.
Irish whiskey. Yeah, I mean, it's Irish whiskey is complex. It's good. They've been trying it out for hundreds of years to perfect it, and it's going pretty well.
And what's your favorite Irish whiskey brand?
Well, I mean, I love Jameson's because I'm a stereotypical Irish person.
Okay.
So I'm going to answer that question. But there are thousands of them, and they're totally unique based on where they're brewed. It's very cool. It's very cool.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would pick Irish whiskey as well. But since I'm in Ukraine, I always just drink the vodka, the horilka. But okay, next. River Nor or Dnipro River?
Dnipro River, definitely. Much more iconic.
Of course. What, do people swim in the River Nor or?
They try to, yeah. I mean, it floods and breaks its banks every now and then.
Okay.
But the Dnipro River is far more iconic, I think.
Iconic. Okay, right on. Have you swam in the Dnipro?
Not yet.
Not
I
yet.
will, though.
Do you know what Vodochrestia is?
No.
It's basically this kind of it's church related to church event. So basically, I think it's like in February or March, people go to like a body of water and they dunk themselves in it like 3 times. So it's like winter still, and the water is typically very cold or freezing.
Oh.
And they designate some areas like in Kyiv at least where people do this, and everyone's there just like in their Speedos. Sometimes girls go
Really?
naked, stuff like this. Yeah, I've gone twice.
Interesting.
Yeah, so basically it's like Vodochrestia, it's like water. I don't know. It's like something about like church where it cleans like your kind of soul. I don't know.
Cleanses your soul, that sort
Something
of
like
thing.
this. You just dunk yourself in water.
Gosh, the Ukrainians are so symbolic with their water.
Yeah.
I found myself on a nudist beach in Odessa literally 2 weeks ago. And I was
Accidentally,
like,
right?
Yes. I was like, what is this?
Exactly. Why am I naked?
Yeah. They love their rivers and water.
Oh yeah, of course, man. Of course. Okay, last one. Kilkenny or Odessa?
I think Odessa. Odessa, my heart will always be in Odessa. I think it's the most beautiful city I have ever been to in my life. The mix between Italian, French, and Islamic architecture, everything about it is just absolutely stunning. I think I can never really get it out of my mind. I think it's the most amazing city ever. And no one really thinks of it. It's kind of slightly forgotten, but it makes it more of a mystery, more of a surprise.
But then you're moving to Kyiv.
Well, I mean, the weather is cooling down. You reminded me. Also, no one speaks English there,
Oh
so
yeah,
it's
okay.
kind of lonely for someone like me.
Yeah.
But I can appreciate how gorgeous it is.
And how's your Ukrainian coming along?
Slowly and terribly.
I said jacuzzi, and you're like, Corey, stop this right now.
Yeah, I'm very slowly getting there, but it's going to take a long time.
It's so funny. It's like a simple word. Like, okay, getting there, Caolan. Baby steps, right?
Baby steps. Very,
Okay, baby
very,
steps.
very baby steps.
Okay, fair enough. So I'll ask you the question you probably get asked a lot. Why are you in Ukraine?
Well, I fell in love with this country. Last year, I went to visit Kyiv for about 3 days because John Sweeney was living here and we had just hired him with Byline TV, which is an organization that I run. And he said, Caolan, you got to come out here. It's like the Wild West, and we can make a short film about the number of people that have been killed in the war. And I was always quite good as a filmmaker about symbolizing imagery. You know, when COVID happened, I hired out a stadium in London and tried to visually show how many people had been killed by that virus in the UK at the time. And I wanted to do the same thing here. So I hired a stadium in Bucha that was half bombed out. And we made a beautiful movie there. John was basically sitting next to seats that were half destroyed and saying, who should have been sitting here? Who should have been, you know, imagine if you were at a show right now and the audience was cheering. This stadium can hold 5,000 people. Imagine 100 stadiums like it. This is how many people have been killed in this country. And that film came out, and I started hearing stories from soldiers and volunteers and NGO workers returning from the front lines in this country. And they would tell me in bars here horrific stories about things that were going on. And I was completely gripped, and I felt like I wanted to tell those stories. You know, I don't have political power, I don't have financial power, but I know how to tell stories and know how to use a camera. So John and I decided one night that I was going to stay here, and we headed east. So we went to Chaziv Yar, we went and stayed in Kramatorsk, which is in the Donbass, and we started making a movie about what was happening in this country for real. I realized one night when I was talking to one of the locals here that white phosphorus was being used in civilian areas in that part of Ukraine. The locals called it lustra, which means chandelier in Ukrainian. And they would describe it at night as just this glowing light falling from the sky. This is something that burns at 5,000 degrees, that burns everything it touches. And it is against the Geneva Convention, and it is against basically the basics of humanity to use it against civilians. And the Russians are using it against people here every single day. And so I started following that story, and I guess I just stayed here for weeks and weeks filming evidence of this stuff being used in places where specifically just civilians lived. That took us to Kherson as well, which is somewhere I spent last weekend. And they were burning down people's houses on the Dnieper River, which is a war crime, and again, against every natural law that should exist. And I went back to London and I released that documentary, and I submitted all the findings that we got to the ICC. The film won 12 awards, which was really amazing and satisfying.
Under Deadly Skies, right? Is this the one?
Yeah, Apple TV bought it, which was amazing. And I was being invited to all these events with canapes and ceremonies. I was flown to the Prix in France and to film festivals in Ireland. And it felt wrong that I was in all these very glamorous, beautiful places, and I couldn't stop thinking about the people in this country and who was still alive that I'd met. And I had the image of every Ukrainian that I'd met here burned into my mind, and all I could think about was coming back here, which is why I relocated here. But it was weird. It was weird coming here and making a film about something so intense, and then trying to go back to UK politics, trying to talk about how Brexit had impacted the price of imports, trying to talk about how the UK election was Labour versus Conservative. It all felt meaningless compared to what I saw here. Which is why I made the decision to move here permanently, because again, I felt powerless in the UK. And then I realized that the power that I had that could maybe even change one slight thing was the ability to tell stories and use a camera. And I have a camera, and that's why I came to Ukraine with it. So that's what I'm doing now, I guess.
You said, you know, a lot of the people here, they kind of touched you in a certain way, impacted you. Is there someone that you've met here, like on your journeys on the East, that's kind of had like a more profound impact on you? Like a story?
Yeah, there's a woman that I met in a place called Siversk, which is surrounded by frontline fire. It's north of Bakhmut. And I interviewed her in a town that was heavily hit. And the town square that she was living in was filled with beautiful trees. And she said that she planted the seeds in these trees to make them grow. And she was crying because those trees were being chopped down to build firewood to heat the homes because the Russians had meant it so that the power was cut off. And she said, all I can think about is planting seeds back in the town center here so that when this war is over, when this awful war is over, life will return and our children and our grandchildren can grow happily and alive under the shades of those trees. And then she got really excited and her face lit up and she took me to this tiny little flower that was growing in the town square. And this place was absolutely destroyed. Like, this is one of the worst places I've ever been. Artillery nonstop. And there's this beautiful flower growing in the middle of the town square. And she was like, this is what we're fighting for. This is life. And she just couldn't stop talking about how this plant had grown there. And that was everywhere in Ukraine. I mean, when I went to Kherson, there was a street cleaner wearing a flak jacket that was cleaning up glass from a bombed out building. And I said, why are you risking your life to clean the streets here? And she was like, because this is how we'll win this war, because keeping things clean and beautiful and loving our cities is what separates us from the Russians. It's a mentality that doesn't exist in Britain, and it's a mentality that I've never seen anywhere on this planet other than Ukraine. And it's absolutely amazing. Inspiring. It's something that the West could learn from. All of our countries that are slightly broken right now could learn from the people of Ukraine. And I think this existed well before the war.
You know, I've heard like so many stories, you know, people's struggles and just how their lives changed because of this war. And it's really sad. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to stay in Ukraine as well. Because I feel like I've been here 9 years. I feel like in a lot of ways, I'm Ukrainian. You know, I'm not Ukrainian, but I feel like I'm really connected with these people. And I can't stand just relaxing. I was in Portugal for a bit, but I come back every 3 months. I can't imagine like, oh, I'm in Portugal, just working remotely, hanging out by the beach. And people are here just, you know, a lot of the guys are stuck here, unfortunately, because they can't leave.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the guys are fighting, sleeping in trenches. I don't know. You just feel kind of guilty, you know, especially if it's one of your people and you've seen like a lot more of this devastation, destruction than I have. So I can imagine how it's impacted you as well, man. Yeah.
Well, it's intense. I mean, today the Russians hit the market in Kherson that I was filming in on Friday and killed 7 people. And I recognized one of the people that was killed because she sold me apples on Friday, and I noticed that because she had pink shoes. And it's extremely hard to see all of that and to continue living any kind of normal life. I mean, it inspires me to continue making films about, you know, to show the world what's going on. But what's happening here is out of control. The fact that the media isn't, I think, paying attention to what's going on enough is crazy. But it's shocking all the time. What I saw in Kherson was a new type of warfare as well that I don't think the world is prepared for. You know, China put on a drone show a few days ago where they put 10,000 drones in the sky, and that was actually a show of military force. What the Russians are doing in Kherson right now is basically testing out a new type of warfare that is going to be the type of warfare that exists on every battlefield of the future of the world, which is using drones. And Kherson was the testing ground for it, and I saw that firsthand. There's no way to protect yourself from it. When I was there last year with John Sweeney, artillery was the threat to your life. You could hear the booms in the distance all the time. The river that runs straight through the center of that city is occupied in its south. Imagine if you're living in London, the river, you know, south of the river is where the Russians are. and north of the river is where the Ukrainians are. All the buildings that face north felt safe to be in. Now there's no protection anymore because drones dominate the skies, and the Ukrainians have no defense against it, and they kill everyone all the time. And they were specifically looking at me when I was there because they know when a foreigner's phone enters the city, because they built 4 and 5G towers all across the Dnieper River and bombed the Ukrainian towers so they can download your information as soon as you're there and specifically target you, which is why a drone chased me within minutes of taking a phone call with my mother when I first got there. And it is out of control.
Yeah.
And this is happening today. This is happening right now in Ukraine. And I can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, I saw the video you posted on social media of you running from like tree to tree, and you could hear the buzzing of the drone in the background. It seems so surreal, man, just like watching that.
Having trees protect you and the oldest form of nature protect you is weird. It makes it feel like you're in a war that's maybe even thousands of years ago. This is the type of stuff that, the type of warfare that was going on in medieval times were moats, were cannons and things like that, you know, in the British countryside. And it kind of felt the same way in Kherson because the leaves on the trees were your only protection there. And I remember locals telling me that they didn't want to leave their houses until the wind started to blow, because that's when the drones get disrupted. So in Britain and London, we wait for the rain to stop and we wait for the wind to stop before we leave the house. In Kherson, you wait for the wind to start before you can leave the house. You rely on Mother Nature to protect you. And what's happening in Kherson, and I could feel it, is the leaves are falling from the trees right now as autumn comes, as winter comes. And you can see the leaves falling. And that is the last protection that people have there. And it's going to be gone soon. Everyone walks through the trees and under the trees. Everyone parks under the trees right now because it's the only protection there is from the drones. That's going to be gone quite soon. And no one is going to know what to do when that happens.
So from what you're saying is these drones are specifically attacking civilians then, right?
The Russians 3 months ago declared the entirety of Kherson in the red zone, which means every civilian is a legitimate target for them. So they've started to kill people left, right, and center. Again, why 7 people were killed today in the market. They're incentivized. I've been told by a military person who operates there that if they hit someone who's a police officer, they get a $50 bonus. If they hit someone with a car, they get a $100 bonus. If they hit a lot of the time they'll hit civilians on their way out before the drone batteries die because they still get a $10 bonus. So the Russians are paid and incentivized through this kind of warfare to wreak havoc on Kherson. And being in that city, it feels like you're being hunted in a way you can't hide from. I mean, there are stories of drones with RPGs on them that can blow a hole in your window and then send another drone into your apartment and kill you in your bed. There's no hiding from any of it. And it's a type of warfare I didn't think would exist yet, but it's happening in 2024 now. And I don't know how there's anyone with any sense of mental state left in Kherson. I mean, I was there for 2 days, and I had, in 3 occasions, drones chase me and witnessed absolute horror. I couldn't sleep while I was there. I put my microphone, my DJI microphone, on the windowsill, and I left it recording all night. And the next morning, I looked at the waveforms, and there were 370 explosions throughout the night. I couldn't sleep through that. I don't know how anyone else in that city can sleep through that. This is just out of control.
So are there people walking the streets like during the day?
Barely.
Barely?
People leave the house at 8 o'clock in the morning when curfew ends. They go to a market that gets set up, the market that was hit this morning. They buy all their stuff, and then they go back to their basements, and they spend the rest of their days there. This is a city that was inhabited by 370,000 people and is now empty. I'd say there's less than 10,000 people left there, and the only people that are left stay in their homes all day. And I don't blame them. I wanted to do that when I was there. I'm a filmmaker, so I forced myself to leave the house. But I only felt safe when I was inside. But it's completely deserted. I was there last year, and there were still quite a lot of people there then. The cafes were slightly busy. The people of Kherson are the most resilient people I have ever met in my whole life. They fought against the Russians during the occupation. and they protested, and they celebrated when liberation happened. And the Russians, which is what they're best at, have eroded that city in a way that I cannot describe. Every single day they try to wear and break down the people there. And it's kind of working. And there's almost no one left. You can see it. The streets are completely empty. Walking through the streets of a major built-up city like that with high rises that is completely empty is the most surreal, strange thing I think I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I've been to Kherson, but before the full-scale invasion, it seemed like a lively city. I was only there for like a couple of days or something like this, but it seemed like a normal, lively city. I can only imagine what it even looks like now with all the destruction of the city.
The color's been drained from that city.
Yeah.
You know, the cultural art center was hit there on Thursday when I first arrived, and there was a piano surrounded by flames that I filmed, because the Russians like to destroy anything with any kind of culture and beauty. That's what they do best. And every single day, slowly, life drains out of that city. And the city's known for its symbols of like watermelons and paper planes.
Mm.
There's a music video that I found that was filmed in the Cultural Arts Center that was bombed that someone showed me after I left, and it was of young girls and kids throwing paper planes through the sky and singing how much they love Kherson. And I saw some of those paper planes still hanging from the town center that was left there. But it's a huge loss, that city. It has more culture than cities in the UK. I mean, it's an amazing place with the most resilient people you can possibly imagine, and every single day it's being eroded by the Russians because they're so close. And the power is out there because when the Russians come, darkness follows. Everywhere they go, you can feel them. You can actually feel it in your skin when you're near the Russians. You can feel them at the other side of the river there in Kherson. It's out of control.
Does Kherson have like a? Is it like very unique when it comes to these cities that are close to the front line? As in, you know, if you go to Kramatorsk even or like Kharkiv, do you get the same like feeling of, I guess, like unsafeness as you do like in Kherson?
Oh, it's terrifying there. You can feel the Russians at the other side of the river. In places like Chaziv Yar and Kramatorsk, where I was, there's fighting in the fields around the cities. And it's messy, and no one really knows where the front line is. In Kherson, it's very specific. It's very, very, very unique, because it's a river, and it's the Russians and the Ukrainians, and there's nothing like it actually in the world. And it's far more terrifying. And you know, and you can feel that the Russians dominate that city because they built those 5G towers south of the river, and they can see and hear everything that you're doing. They know who comes in and out of that place. And they're in some ways winning that war because they're now building 4,000 drones a day in Russia, and they're shipping them to Kherson, and they're crashing them into people constantly. And there's no defense against it. It's the most exposed I've ever felt anywhere on any front line in this country. You know, when I was in Konstantinivka, I came under fire by a cluster bomb with Paul Conroy, which is in the film that I made. And, you know, there were explosions everywhere. It was extremely messy. It was terrifying. But you knew where it came from. And there's only so much that artillery can do to you that's specifically targeted. In Kherson, it was a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
I felt like they could see me. Like they could see who I was.
You were exposed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the streets are empty. So you walk through the streets, you can hear a drone in the sky, and they know who you are. They can download your phone information, and they're trying to kill you. I mean, they were trying to kill me, and they knew who I was, and they could see me through the drone lens. And it's a type of warfare that's even more inhumane than artillery as well, because, you know, in traditional types of war, you can see your enemy on the battlefield before you fire that gun or throw a grenade. With drones, it's a video game.
Yeah.
And it dehumanizes things far more. And it makes it easier to kill people.
Yeah, I remember I had a guest, Sean Pinner. Do you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Sean was one of my guests. And so he was encircled in Mariupol. And he understood he had three options. He can either, you know, fight his way out or keep defending his position, maybe could potentially die. That's one option. Another option would be surrender. And the third option would be try to escape. So he went for the third option. He tried to escape. And he said when he was escaping, there was like, he had to go from building to building. And so he was in like one of the buildings and you would hear the drone. And he's like, it was like a scene from the, Terminator, the beginning of Terminator, when it's like, in the future. And you could see the drone look in all the windows. If the window's blown up, it kind of goes in, looks around. And he had to like hide from the drones. He's like, dude, it was like super post-apocalyptic, kind of like, Terminator, a scene from Terminator.
Yeah, that's
It's
what
so
it's
surreal.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the feeling of being hunted by a drone and hearing it above you and knowing that someone's looking at you is unlike anything I can possibly describe. The fear that I felt when I was in Chasiv Yar and Kramatorsk was nothing compared to what I saw in Kherson. And this is what people have to live through every single day in that city, every single day. And, I'm 30 years old. I'm quite young. I could run and duck and dive from these things. I don't know how an 87-year-old woman can cope. And people who are immobile can cope with what's going on there. It's like out of control. This is like it's like a science fiction novel.
And it's mostly older people left in the city, right? Do you see young people?
Well, people in Kherson, the people that are left, there actually are quite a lot of children there, but the main people that are left there, so a lot of kids, are people that can't afford to leave.
Yeah.
But one of the main interviews that I did was, I asked everyone that I met there, why have you stayed? And this one woman said, because my husband is buried here, my son is buried here. And if I was given the option between the Russians shooting me and me staying here, I would tell them to shoot me, and me leaving, and I would tell them to shoot me. This is just how people feel. People are deeply symbolic and sentimental there. And I don't blame them. And like a lot of people in the city basically described it as well as every day that we survive and live in this city is a fuck you to the Russians, which it kind of feels like. But I don't know how those people are still living there. I mean, when I see the videos like today of what happened in the market, I absolutely despair. I could barely mentally cope with being there for 2 days. I have no idea how people are there in the long term. I have no idea.
And you recognize this woman by her shoes, right?
Yeah, she sold me some apples last Thursday, and she was killed by a drone this morning. Or artillery, I don't know what it was. And it's extremely hard to see a lot of this stuff. It's extremely draining. I've actually, I find it extremely hard to think about. But it's like in Ria, this is a restaurant in Kramatorsk that I used to go to every single night with John Sweeney, and we called it the Shelter in the Storm. It was the only restaurant that was open in Kramatorsk, and every night when we'd come back from the front lines, we would go there. And it would feel like a piece of normalcy. It would feel like a piece of home and comfort, and the staff would work around the clock to help us if we had a flat tire, or help us feel like there was a piece of life that still existed. And the Russians put a surface-to-air missile, an S-300, into that last year and killed everyone inside of it. And I can't stop thinking about everyone that's gone there, and I can't stop thinking about everyone in Kherson that has to live through that. I don't know how they do it. But it's addictive, and it makes me want to stay here and makes me want to continue making films.
So this is just terrorism then, right? There's no military targets here. They're just trying to get everyone scared, get everyone out of the area, level the whole place.
It's no different to ISIS. I mean, journalists were surprised when they started arriving in Ukraine. I don't wear my press jacket when I go to frontline areas in this country that says the word press on it, because the Russians are incentivized and specifically target press. ISIS were one of the first groups to have done that, which shocked the journalism world back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And this is what the Russians do, because the Russians are no different to ISIS. They're no different to the terrorist groups that exist in the Middle East that we look at like that. But the Western world don't seem to look at them in the same way. But they are. Wagner is basically ISIS. The Russian army targets civilians in a way that has not happened in wartime. Yeah. But this is how they operate. This is what they do. They don't see Ukrainians as people. They see every Ukrainian as fair game, as a legitimate target, and because they're fascists, and fascists operate by humanizing themselves and dehumanizing everybody else, and that's exactly what they do, and that's why this is happening now.
I feel like there is a difference between the Russian military and ISIS. Russian military is state funded. Yeah, that's basically it. Both terror groups, though.
Correct. Yeah, I mean that's true actually.
Yeah, but let's talk about. yeah, before we get too deep on this Kherson thing, like it's I don't know, it's getting very like emotional for me. But let's talk about what you were doing before. You were working for Rebel Media. And I thought it's Rebel Media, and I feel like this is very interesting because you weren't always like this Caolan that you are now. You've kind of, from what I read about you and the interviews I saw about you, you wanted to get a better understanding of what's going on, like in the news, and the algorithm fed you a bunch of stuff, and you got stuck in this kind of, I guess, right-wing echo chamber. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, well, gosh, in 2016, I was pretty young. I worked for a regular news. I worked for the Gordon Ramsay Group in London in a restaurant, and I wasn't involved in politics. But I saw in that year a lot of terror attacks happening across Europe. I saw the rise of Trump. Trump won that year, and Brexit happened. So it was a very politically charged year. So I started typing into YouTube current affairs and political events. Like I grew up online, so I wanted to know what was going on through YouTube. And I remember the Orlando shooting happened. 50 gay people killed in a nightclub. The one thing of politics that I did know about myself was that I was a gay person, and I didn't like homophobia. And I wanted to understand why a Islamist would kill 50 gay people in America's worst mass shooting at the time.
So Miami, right?
Yeah, Orlando. Yeah,
Orlando. Sorry, Orlando.
So I typed that in, and I saw a video by someone called Milo Yiannopoulos and Gavin McGuinness, and they were presenting outside the scene of the shooting, and they were saying this has happened because of Islam. This has happened because of Islamic scripture. In the Quran, it's very homophobic. This and this and this. It was quite convincing. I watched the mainstream media news reports about the Orlando shooting, and there was no mention of the ideology of the shooter, which is wrong still to this day. And I started listening to those voices. And after watching that video, I got recommended hundreds of other videos that went beyond the scope of what I was watching. So it was about, feminism being terrible, Trump being great, Brexit being great. This is how the algorithms work. They know that you're hooked on something that's slightly right-wing. They'll feed you a lot more of it. And I started listening to this stuff on the way to work all the time. Trump's inauguration happened January 2017, and there was a protest against it in London. So I went and filmed that. And I interviewed people there, leftists, people who are, I guess, left-wing or feminists who are protesting against Trump. Made them look foolish. It was the first video of its kind in the UK that was kind of right-wing in that kind of slapstick way. And it went viral overnight. The next morning, it had 1.7 million views on YouTube. Nigel Farage, Ezra Levant, everybody was sharing it. It was huge. And I've been offered jobs by all the people that I've been watching videos of for the last 6 months. And I guess I went from someone that was watching this content to someone that was at the center of it. A lot of my normal friends and family stopped speaking to me when I was making that content because I guess it's deemed as unacceptable outside the realms of what's normal. But I mean, all I was talking about at the time was kind of free speech being under attack, gay rights being incompatible with Islamism, and feminism being incompatible with Islamism. But what I realized over time in the 6 months that I made that content was that the people that were propagating a lot of this stuff around me were far more extreme than they appeared online. They appear alt-light online and far more alt-right in person.
Do you feel like they used you?
Yeah, I think they realized that I was someone that was smart, that was a good filmmaker, that could make beautiful content. And I felt like I was groomed by those people. I made them a lot of money. I contributed to hundreds of millions of views for those people. I completely feel used by them, even to this day. And I didn't leave the right until I realized that I was completely wrong when me and a girl called Lauren Southern, who's a very famous right-wing activist in Canada, went to Turkey, and we illegally snuck into Turkey. This would have been 2018, and we were filming human traffickers who were bringing people to the islands, the Greek islands, and we were camping out on the beaches every single night, waiting for migrants to arrive. And we expected to see young, fighting age, furious young men who wanted to invade Europe and who were violent and horrible and armed. And the people that turned up on the night that I was there were, yes, some of them were young men, but mainly women and children who were desperately leaving Syria and just using Turkey as a route to find safety in Europe, who wanted nothing to do with violence and war. And I couldn't believe how wrong I was about everything. One of the women who was climbing down the side of a mountain towards the beach at 2 o'clock in the morning, the moonlight was the only thing illuminating any of this, was like 80 years old, and she took a bad fall and she had all of her belongings in a bin bag. And I just felt like I was completely wrong about all of these people. And I waited on the beach with them, waiting for the boat to arrive to take them into Europe. And I got worried because the boat didn't turn up and a helicopter started to circulate. And I had this shared fear with them just for a moment, thinking, if I get arrested, I'm going to go to prison in Turkey. They're going to go to prison in Turkey. And I had this shared fear and like shared common fear of what they have to go through, even just for a day. So we left. We thought that the reason the boat didn't arrive was because they thought that we might have been the police. And me and Lauren drove up north past Avalik. And the sun started to rise over the mountains. And I just turned around to her and I said, I hope they make it to Europe.
Wow.
And it was just like this moment where I realized I was rooting for them. And I had fought against immigrants coming to Europe for a whole year. And then suddenly I had this shared fear that they had, and I was rooting for them. And I realized if I was wrong about that, I was probably wrong about everything else. And this is also why I decided to set up Byline TV and come to Ukraine, because I realized the power of propaganda and misinformation and how convincing it can be. And even if someone like me, who was quite smart as a young kid, could have been convinced by absolute bullshit, anyone else could be. And the number one source of disinformation and misinformation that exists now is the stuff that's coming out of the Kremlin. We've seen this with Tenet Media, and we've seen this with Russia pretending that there isn't even a war in this country. And I wanted to dedicate my life to fighting disinformation and fighting the stuff that convinced me to become radicalized when I was young, which I guess is why I'm here. And it kind of took me here as well in a lot of ways, because I know how it works. Like I can see it and feel it.
This Nick Shirley guy came to town. He's young as well. Do you see a lot of parallels with kind of the content he's making or the path he is down and when you were young?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have some sympathy for Nick Shirley. He obviously, this is the kid that came here in early August and made a type of propaganda I didn't think was even possible, which is to pretend
real journalism.
Yeah,
investigative journalism.
Yeah, well, you don't have MAGA sort of YouTubers come to the capital of a country at war and make content like that. That's so unusual. I have never seen anything like it. But I knew exactly what he was doing because I used to be like him when I was younger. And I kind of hope he'll change one day. I mean, I sent him really nice messages a couple of weeks ago saying that I used to do what he did, and I hope he follows the path of good one day. But I knew exactly what he was doing, and he very, very successfully weaponized algorithms in this country and weaponized algorithms in the West to minimize the war here, to make a lot of money from YouTube and TikTok ad revenue, and apply the sort of model of MAGA YouTube content to a war, which is completely unprecedented. And I guess I was quite successful in taking him down because I knew how it worked. I knew exactly the type of stuff that he was doing, and I've done that sort of stuff before. So I could deep dive into it. But what he did was incredibly damaging. It still is. And I think we're going to see more of that stuff, especially around the time of the election now. You know?
Yeah. And yeah, because when Nick was here, like this video he made was super controversial, but then he started to change his tune a bit, and he started to create better content about Ukraine.
Well, he did temporarily, but he got 40,000 views on his video that was positive about Ukraine because he has built an audience that does not care about Ukraine looking good. He's built an audience about hating Ukraine.
So you think he cares more about his views, likes, shares, money over actually reporting on what's going on? Yeah,
because YouTube algorithms and Twitter algorithms especially incentivizes that sort of content, incentivizes content that's anti-Ukraine, that's pro-Trump, that's shocking, that's controversial. When I was working with Tommy Robinson, when I was working with people on the right, the more extreme the content we would create, the more we would be rewarded with views. And that's what he's being incentivized with. It's not even his fault in a lot of ways. It's the fault of the social media companies that fund, push, and pay money for more extreme content, which is why he's creating it, you know?
And how pervasive do you think Russian disinformation is online?
Well, Russian disinformation basically has been so successful in the last few years that it has disrupted the democracies of America and Britain. It's the reason that Brexit happened. It's the reason that January 6th happened. If you could have told someone a few years ago that there would be a riot like we saw on January 6th, because people didn't even believe in democracy itself and even trust the voting system, I think people wouldn't have believed you. But this is heavily related to what Russia's been doing against us for years. Russia has been at war with us for a long period of time. They have done chemical attacks in Britain. They've shot down planes over Europe. They've interfered with the very basics of our democracy, and they're actively at war with us, and we have no idea. We act too slow, too little, too late to deal with it, which is ridiculous.
But how do you deal with this disinformation online?
You throw people in prison. So the Tenet media scandal that happened a few weeks ago, basically $10 million was given to someone called Lauren Shen, who has an address book filled with right-wingers that are very high profile in the US. She recruited a lot of very, very famous people like Tim Pool, and they set up this news outlet that's very similar to Rebel, and put out disinformation that literally influences and informs how people vote in America. And this was just one network that was discovered in the US that the FBI uncovered. No one's been thrown in prison yet. No one's been dealt with. If Britain or America went to China or Russia and set up propaganda networks in places like Moscow or Beijing, the people associated with that would be thrown in prison within seconds for treason, rightfully. We don't do the same thing because we're too cautious, because we don't understand the Russian threat that exists to us, which is huge. It undermines everything about our society. And the moment I think as a society we realize what's really going on will be the moment it's too late. But we should throw people in prison for this. Lauren Shen should be thrown in prison for taking $10 million from Margarita Simonyan from Russia Today. But in America, they're too scared to do that because they don't want to throw journalists in prison. Or they don't want to be seen like they're going after the press, when actually none of the people that are putting out Russian propaganda in the US are journalists. They are propagandists, and they should be seen as propagandists and dealt with as propagandists. We see this with Tim Pool. These people all knew that they were taking Kremlin money. They knew. I know they knew, because I know their producers, and their producers told me months before the scandal broke that they knew that they were taking Russian money. But they continue to do it anyway, and they haven't been dealt with by their government in the right way, and they should be. But we act too little too late. Angela Merkel, after Crimea was taken by Russia, went for a champagne lunch with Putin and opened the Nord Stream pipeline, because in the West, we're still intoxicated with the fumes of Russian gas and cheap Russian money. And it needs to end. London is the Russian money laundering capital of the world. And this is why we're in the situation we're in. It's an absolute disgrace.
Yeah, I know a lot of this Russian disinformation is trying to destabilize, American politics, and mostly it's kind of they're promoting this kind of Trump agenda. Do you think that if Harris gets elected, then a lot of this disinformation will slow down?
No, I don't think that Harris is strong enough on the problem. She's very pro-Ukraine, which is great, but there is no candidate that exists in Britain or America, France, or anywhere that actually understands and deals with the Russian threat in terms of what it is. So I would much rather she wins over Trump. That's good. Trump is in the pocket of Putin because he's compromised by Russia. And if he wins, it could be the downfall of Ukraine. So that would be terrible. But Harris is nowhere close to understanding the actual Russian threat. Biden was politically active during the Cold War, so he is scared of Russia because it was a terrifying time when he was around in those days, and he's still kind of scared of that Soviet threat. But Harris, as much as she wants to prove herself, is nowhere close to what needs to be done.
Yeah, and a lot of people say 4 years of Harris would probably be a continuation of kind of the Biden administration. Do you think that's the case here?
Yeah, four
Like,
years of the
well,
Biden admin.
according to like Ukraine policy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, 4 years of Biden is already 4 years of Harris because I don't think Biden is that sentient right now. And I think that she's basically been running things anyway.
Yeah.
So it will just be another 4 years of what we've been seeing.
Okay, so what is yeah, I was talking with, or I guess I missed this question with John Sweeney, but what is the end game here? Like for the Ukraine war? Like, do they just slowly trickle in weapons and aid, hoping for a stalemate?
I think the
Do
US
they want to, have Russia go back to their borders?
I think the US doesn't want Ukraine to win. The US doesn't want Ukraine to lose. I think the US likes that this war is eroding the Russian army and breaking it down slowly. And that's all they care about. They have not given this country the weapons it needs to defend itself and the permissions to use those weapons. They haven't given this country the permissions to fire inside the ammunition depots and destroy the places where planes are taking off that are bombing cities in this country, because they want to prolong this war as much as possible, because there's a lot to benefit from it going on as long as possible, which is the humiliation and the degradation of the Russian army, which is kind of nonsense as well, because if you live in the West and you live in Britain or America, Ukraine is the largest country in Europe, and it's being actively invaded in a medieval way by a communist Soviet bloc. And everyone is under threat if you live in the West and you're watching what's going on. And the interests of American politicians right now is only to degrade the Russian army and not to actually defend what is basically a place we all live. And that's a disaster.
And as an Irishman, I know Ireland is not really like a big player in geopolitics, but what is Ireland doing right now to support Ukraine, or are they having an impact on the battlefield?
Well, Ireland is pretty neutral. It always has been. I mean, Ireland didn't get involved in World War II. My grandmother told me stories on her communion. The Nazis accidentally bombed Dublin, thinking it was Liverpool. And she showed me a video of her in her communion dress with this massive site behind her, this huge crater. But Ireland has always tried to remove itself from politics like that. Britain has done too little too late, as well as America. I don't think any country in the West has actually done what needs to be done to allow this country to win this war.
Yeah, and you've seen like a lot of the destruction in the East. Let's talk about your documentary, Under Deadly Skies, right? So which cities in Ukraine did you go to when you're filming this documentary?
So that was filmed in Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, and Kherson. So it took us from the east to the south, and it specifically focused on chemical weapons, white phosphorus used against civilians. I also went to a torture chamber in Kherson that was so inhumane. It was basically a Soviet torture chamber built in the 1950s by the Soviet Union there. And the
What do you mean it's a torture chamber? It's somebody's basement, or it's an actual?
It's a network of tunnels underground the police station in Kherson. The Ukrainians, when Ukraine became independent, closed it because they thought it was too inhumane. When the Russians took Kherson, they opened it again because that's how they operate. And I interviewed some people who returned there for the first time in front of me, and they walked down the hallways and they looked through the doors of these tunnel networks, trying to remember which room it was that they were tortured in. And I walked into one of the rooms with Alexander, who's in the film, and you could see his initials carved into the wall and the days that he was there, every single day that he had drawn.
How many days?
It was like 67 days.
67.
He was a car salesman as well. You know, these are regular civilians that were thrown in prison and tortured by the Russians for simply looking at soldiers the wrong way. And he did nothing to deserve what he went through.
What did he go through? What kind of torture were we talking about?
Electrocution. They electrocuted his genitals. They threw water over them all and made everyone in his cell wake up every morning and sing the Russian national anthem, because it was about Slava Rossiya, Slava Shigu. It was about stripping them of their Ukrainian identities, which is what this is about. You know, whenever anyone ever denies what's going on in this country, This is fundamental. It was about gathering evidence. This is why I made that film, about the Russians stripping Ukrainians of their identity, and destroying everything that is Ukraine. Otherwise, they wouldn't wake up in the morning and sing the Russian national anthem if they didn't care about that. If they saw Ukrainians as their Slavic brothers and sisters, they wouldn't be doing that. But that's exactly what it's about.
They wouldn't kidnap children either, and then just send them to Russia and have them form a new identity that is Russian and not Ukrainian.
Yeah. Well, this is what it's about because look, Russia has hundreds of cities across 7 time zones. It's a huge area. But unfortunately, those cities are filled with Russians, so they're dysfunctional and shit. So they need cities built by actual people who are intelligent, like Ukrainians, and that's why they're taking these cities and trying to take the cities in this country, because Russians cannot create anything for themselves. Even during this space race in the Soviet era, most of the scientists that were working on the space programs were Ukrainian scientists that were stolen and taken to Moscow, because the Russians are like, it's like a peasant medieval culture that's incapable of creating anything. And so they have to come to Ukraine to steal people that are capable of actually building or creating anything. And I could see that. That's why I focused on the torture that was happening there. You know, the Ukrainians closed down those torture chambers because they saw it as inhumane. The Russians reopened it. And when people talk about the victory plan that Zelensky has proposed, this isn't a war about fields or farmlands or land or, you know, or taking back surface area. The experience that people had in Kherson under occupation is the future of what will happen to everyone under Russian occupation right now, which is genocide and torture. And that's what Zelensky doesn't want to happen. That's why he's not budging an inch, and it's why he shouldn't.
Do you think if Putin is no longer in power, whether he dies, there's a coup, whatever, do you think things will change with Russian society?
No, I mean, I think Russian culture is fundamentally rotten. I think that culture comes from people. People don't come from culture. The culture of media and governance in Russia has been created because of the people of Russia. That's how they are. They're indifferent to this war. And I don't care if you have a Russian friend who might be nice and who might not be utterly contemptible. I literally don't care. The majority of Russians don't care and are indifferent in this war. They don't care about Ukrainians, and they support a fascist regime. There is a small number of people in Ukraine compared to Russia. And in 2014, you had, you know, the Maidan Revolution. You had people in this country protest. There's 10 times more people in Russia. There's been no protests against this war. They could do that. There's been no protests because they don't care. And I think there's fundamentally something wrong with Russians culturally and as a people, and I don't think things are going to change much there, regardless.
Is there a solution here, like to fix this kind of culture or the society, or should we just like keep them in the dark, abandon them?
I think abandon. I think Russia should be seen as a rogue state in the way we look at, you know, Syria, the way that we look at countries that are. I think Russia should be seen as a rogue state. It shouldn't be taken as seriously as we look at it. We're all terrified of the breakup of Russia. What would happen if Putin dies? Well, when the Soviet Union fell, nothing bad happened. It just changed. I think that it should.
Think Russia should be balkanized?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. I think it should be destroyed as a country. But if Russia breaks up, if Russia becomes a rogue state of farmlands and fields, I think it's absolutely fine. I don't think anyone's going to lose out. I think that's absolutely okay.
Okay, what was your experience like in Konstantinivka?
Terrible. That city, which I hope doesn't fall because the Russians are advancing quite heavily. I think they're fighting in the fields around there right now.
Yeah, 'cause I heard nothing but bad news coming out of Konstantinivka. Like it's
a city where the Russians are nearby, so it's emptying out. And again, it was one of the strangest places I've been, actually, because we were driving on this road. It's the road to Bakhmut that goes through there. And Bakhmut was burning because the Russians were destroying it. And there was this layer of smog that I saw in the horizon. And this was on a beautiful day. And it felt like you were driving into Mordor, which is why I think a lot of these analogies come from about Lord of the Rings and the orcs, because literally where the Russians are, it looks like you're driving into hell because everything they touch just burns. And that was kind of what I saw in Konstantinivka. But you can hear, it's a city that's emptying out, a bit like Kherson. My experience there was terrible. We were under fire from a cluster bomb when I was there, in which 6 people died. So it was terrifying. I was, I think, only mentally okay because I was with Paul Conroy, who was with Marie Coven when she died in Homs in Syria. And he said, Caolan, just keep the fear just before your eye level. Everything that's happening in your brain right now, we were lying in the grass, head down, trying to shield from what was going on. He was like, just keep your fear just before your eye level and just hold on to yourself. So that's what stopped me losing my mind. But it's out of control there. And again, like, this isn't really about my experience. It's about the fact that Ukrainians have to live under this every single day. This is how they exist.
Do you think your documentary that you published, it made, I know it won awards, right?
Yeah, 112.
Yeah. Do you think the documentary you put out, it kind of made the impact you wanted it to make?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of right-wingers who I used to know in London, people from GB News, watched it and they were like, I had no idea it was this bad, which was really nice.
Nice.
Because I don't want to preach to the choir. You know, people that know what's happening here know what's happening here. I want people who don't know what's happening in Ukraine to understand what's happening here. So that was amazing as a feeling. Apple TV have bought it, and that's the general audience. And I get comments all the time, and I see comments all the time saying, I didn't know what was going on there. I thought it was the Russian army versus the Ukrainian army. I didn't know that it was the Russians versus everyone that's alive in Ukraine. And that makes me feel deeply proud, like deeply proud, because those are the people that I wanted to convince, because those are the people that don't know what's going on, and now they do.
Yeah, I haven't seen this documentary, but I've seen your interviews. I've seen your I just seen your kind of videos where you explain, you know, what's going on in Ukraine. And I'm a big fan, man. The way you explain it, you know, the words you use, I don't know. And it's all very heartfelt. Like, whenever, I don't know you too well, but whenever you have emotion, Caolan, it shows on your face, no matter what that emotion is. And I feel it through you, you know? I'm like, how should I feel when we look at Caolan's face? Okay, I can feel it. And it feels authentic, you know?
That's so nice.
Yeah, no, I really enjoy your content, man. And when you invited me to do this, like, small interview, I was excited to come on. I was like a little nervous, but I feel so comfortable talking to you, man.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, man.
I can't hide emotion. I think it's why I became obsessed with what's going on here, is because I feel everything very, very deeply, and I can feel what's going on in this country every single day, and just want to document it. But I've never had someone say those words to me before. That's very kind.
Well, there you go, man. Now it's all recorded. It's gonna live on the internet forever. You can keep rewinding it. Oh no, I just, when I'm watching you, like when you're like about to break, I'm like, oh, I'm about to break too. When you're laughing, I'm like, haha. Yeah, no, it's I don't know. It's great talking to you. But what are your plans for the future, man? I know you want to live in Ukraine, right? Because this is your home now. So
yeah, no, I can't actually imagine leaving Ukraine. When this war is over, I hope this damn war ends. And when it is over, then I want to make films about the rebuilding of Ukraine. There's a lot of demining that needs to happen here. But John Sweeney met a guy who had a hot air balloon business, which is,
of course he did,
in West Ukraine. And now he's fighting the guy that runs his hot air balloon business. And I remember speaking to him, and he said, I can't wait for this war to be over so that I can go back to what I was doing before. And I said, when this is over and when you stop fighting, please give me a call, because I want to film you inflating your hot air balloon for the first time and flying over the skies of this country when there's finally peace. And I want to have What a Wonderful World play over it, and have him just illuminate his hot air balloon and just fly over this, and just be over the skies of Ukraine when it's peaceful and beautiful, and have his reaction seeing his country finally at peace, and have that as my final film here. So that's my kind of goal.
So you think you want to settle here and just retire here, or you just wherever the wind takes you? What do you think?
I think I do, actually. I mean, I don't know how the visa process works, but I want to be here like basically forever.
You're basically an honorary Ukrainian now.
I love Ukraine. I mean, there is no other country in the world that has the geography and the climate like Ukraine. You have the mountains that look like Switzerland. You've got the Black Sea.
Yeah.
Crimea looks like Troy. Like you have everything. It's absolutely stunning.
Kherson has like the deserts. like this desert area with the
Yeah.
sands, and then it also has like this pink lake, you know, this salt lake over there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen that too. So you have basically every type of geography that exists. It's like GTA, the video game, that has basically everything that you can just drive
Oh,
across.
it's a beautiful country, and I moved here in 2015, and Crimea was always occupied. And one of my dreams was to go to Crimea, and I still have this dream. It's like the day after it's like you know, Ukraine takes it back, I want to go. Like it's like my big dream.
Amazing.
I don't know. It's
Me too.
yeah. When I heard about this Crimea beach party, you know, St. Javelin thing, I'm like, oh, I'm ready, man. Got my flip flops ready. I'm gonna buy my towel.
Well, Odessa isn't even close, but I love Odessa because it's just a fraction of what I imagine Crimea to be. But the way Ukrainians build cities on the coast is incredible.
Yeah, totally. No, I like the architecture in Odessa. I mean, more so than Kyiv, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like Italian meets French. It's absolutely stunning. And you get that very Mediterranean feel as well, right?
Even a passage, right? Like passage. It's like on the end of Deribasovska, there's like this indoor kind of area, and it looks very Italian.
Yes.
Yeah. It's very beautiful. It's like you're stepping into like a different city. I don't know.
Oh, it is. I mean, I live on
Yeah.
an apartment there on the 20th floor because penthouses are cheap and basements are expensive there right now. And it overlooks everything from the Black Sea to Arcadia. And I can just, every single day, I love watching the sunrise over the sea. And it's so inspiring. It's stunning.
How long were you in Odessa for, by the way?
6 weeks.
Just 6 weeks, okay? Right
Yeah,
on.
not that long. I haven't
Yeah.
moved here that long ago. But obviously I'm moving to Kyiv now because of you.
There you go, bud. You come to one of Corey's parties, you stay forever.
Exactly.
You move here. Nah.
I mean, I'll probably go to Kherson most weekends or go east. I kind of want to go to, well, there's a few places I can't mention where I want to go. But I still want to report from those frontline areas. But the language barrier is difficult in Odessa.
Oh yeah. Why don't you start learning Ukrainian, man?
I have, but I can't learn it at a speed that makes it to have a social life there.
Yeah, of course. No, it takes time. It's a tough language. But yeah, I know like a language school that they will give you free lessons, you know, as a foreign volunteer, or just, you know, as a person like helping Ukraine. I'm sure they'll give you free lessons if you're interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely link you up. I'm
That'd
kind of
be
like
cool.
their ambassador. So yeah, I always try to promote them. But they're called Language Lab, by the way, in case you guys are interested. But anyway, yeah, so I think we reached our time. Not I think we reached our time. But is there anything else that's, you know, we didn't discuss that you want to discuss?
Honestly, you've been a great interviewer. You've like asked me everything that I could have been asked. I think you covered it all.
Oh no, I just prompt you and you tell like an amazing story, and I'm like, whoa. Okay, what's the next one? Prompt him again. Yeah, this is what I'm doing. Give me another story. Like put in a nickel. I get like a story from you.
Yeah,
No,
I think
it's amazing
there's
chatting with
nothing
you.
left in my brain. I think you've done it. I'm drained.
Okay, great. Well, I'll tell you what. Maybe if you want to plug your socials, maybe people want to watch your content. How can they find you? Maybe you know some organizations that you want to support. You can just look into that camera and take it away.
You can follow me, just typing my name into Google or anywhere you want. And if you want to check out Under Deadly Skies, you can see it on Apple TV, and the rest goes from there.
Okay, great. So yeah, if you want to check out Caolan's film, it's called Under Deadly Skies. It's on Apple TV, right?
Yeah.
Apple TV. I haven't seen it yet, so maybe we can watch it together, guys. But thanks for watching this episode of Expats in Ukraine with me, your host, Corey. If you like this episode, give it a thumbs up. I'm going to invite Caolan to maybe watch our live stream of the of this episode. So he'll be in the chat chatting, or the video episode's over already, so he probably was already done chatting with you. But either way, leave a comment. Caolan, you're going to look at the comments, right?
I'll always look at the comments.
Okay, he'll look at the comments, so leave a good one, okay? He can talk about his necklace, his Obey shirt, or the way his sleeve is like tucked up. But anyways, thanks for watching this episode. If you want to see more episodes like this, be sure to subscribe. And Caolan, I like to shake the hand of the guests. Why don't you come on down?
Amazing.
Thanks for coming, man. It was great talking to you.
You too. Amazing.